Follow every moment of the election with CNN. More stories, more insights, and more exclusive election tools like the Road to 270 interactive map. Subscribe for less than $1 a week at cnn.com/subscription.
It's Friday, October 11th, right now on CNN This Morning.
Do not just sit back and hope for the best. Get off your couch and vote.
The final sprint. Kamala Harris bringing out the big dogs, former President Obama and Clinton hitting the trail. Plus this.
Our whole country will end up being like Detroit if she's your president. You're going to have a mess on your hands.
Dissing Detroit. Donald Trump criticizing the Motor City while campaigning in that city. And then this.
It is my priority to keep the jobs in Pittsburgh.
It's the biggest factor in Pennsylvania.
In our battleground beat, we head to Pennsylvania. The state's most strategists think will decide the fate of the White House. And later,
it was the most frightening thing I've ever lived through.
A path of destruction. Hurricane Milton ripping through the state of Florida. Hundreds rescues and the death toll only climbing. Six a.m. here in Washington. Here's a live look at New York City. Good morning, everyone. I'm Manu Raju in for Casey Hunt. It's great to be with you. It's hard to believe, but yes, there are just 25 days left until Election Day. More than 3 million votes have already been cast across 36 states. And next week, early voting will begin in the swing states of Georgia, North Carolina, and Nevada. And as the race for the White House enters its final stretch, a familiar face returning to the campaign trail.
Hello, Pittsburgh!
And that's former President Barack Obama making his first appearance on behalf of Kamala Harris since his speech at the DNC in August. Obama, still one of the more popular figures in the Democratic Party, leaned into Harris's, quote, "not going back" slogan and did not hold back when it came to the former president, Donald Trump.
Even if you had a family member who acted like that, you might still love them, but you tell them you got a problem. And you wouldn't put them in charge of anything. And yet, when Donald Trump lies or cheats or shows utter disregard for our Constitution, when he calls POWs losers or fellow citizens vermin, people make excuses for it. They think it's okay.
Now, as the 44th president brought his message to voters in must-win Pennsylvania, his successor was in another blue wall state. Donald Trump appearing in the crucial swing state of Michigan, where he debuted a new proposal to make interest on car loans tax deductible. He also claimed that if reelected, he would, quote, save the American auto industry, adding this.
So here is the deal that I will be offering to the world, to companies outside of our world, big companies, powerful companies that have become powerful because we were stupid. We were stupid. We allowed them to come in and raid and rape our country. That's what they did. Oh, he used the word rape. That's right. I used the word rape. They raped our country.
All right, joining me now to discuss, Elliot Williams, CNN's legal analyst and a former federal prosecutor, Kate Bedingfield, CNN political commentator and former Biden White House communications director, and Doug Heye, Republican strategist and former communications director for the Republican National Committee. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
I want to start off there in Detroit, where Trump was talking to Michigan voters, talking to the economic forum there, and also had a little jab at the city he was speaking in.
We are a developing nation. Well, we're a developing nation, too. Just take a look at Detroit. Detroit's a developing area, a hell of a lot more than most places in China. The whole country is going to be like, you want to know the truth? It'll be like Detroit. Our whole country will end up being like Detroit if she's your president.
And just a reminder about where the race is in Michigan right now. Donald Trump leading according to the Quinnipiac poll by 3 points. That is barely within the margin of error, which is at 3.1%. So, Doug, you are a Republican strategist. Do you advise a Republican candidate to belittle and demean the city you're trying to win voters in?
Well, the short answer is obviously, absolutely not. And this is one of those things that Donald Trump does, and he seems to get away with it because he's done things like this before. But it also shows that he's not really keeping up with the times. Detroit was a punchline for decades, but that's not true anymore. It's a thriving city. It's a growing city. Jobs are flooding into Detroit. It's a real success story in the American economy right now. And so it's bizarre to me, one, that he would go after them like that. Two, we could talk about sort of the economic wiseness of saying, here, let's go more in debt on a depreciating asset. Like, let's make your car loans free and tax deductible now. Doesn't seem to be the smartest economic strategy, but it sounds good in the soundbite, where he doesn't often sound good in a soundbite.
Whether it's Detroit or Philadelphia or Chicago, going after big, and let's say it, predominantly black cities has worked as a talking point. So it's stunning that he's doing it now 30 however many days. 25 days before election. 25 days before election day, but it's part of the trend. Now, the interesting thing is, even if the room were receptive to what he said there and it was a friendly crowd, he still has to worry about the voters in Detroit who might be voting for Harris and just keeping their votes down. And it's statements like that are only going to animate his opposition. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, and also crime is down in these cities. I mean, this is the other thing. You know, yes, it is a talking point. Yes, it is like textbook Donald Trump fear-mongering. But the fact of the matter is crime is down in major cities across the country. It's down across the country, period. So there is effective, Democrats have effective pushback here to say, not only are you attacking these people living in these swing states who you, in theory, want to vote for you, but also you're not telling the truth about what's going on in these cities. So it gives Kamala Harris and Democrats an opening to go back to a really fundamental argument against Donald Trump, which is that he's a liar.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of opportunities for Democrats to provide that pushback. But Kamala Harris is still underperforming with African Americans, African American males, certainly. We could have that same conversation about Hispanics. It's part of why this campaign is so difficult to figure out.
And speaking of this campaign, just where things are in the blue wall states, you saw those Michigan numbers, but also the Pennsylvania numbers, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. She is up by 3 points, according to the Quinnipiac poll, and that is barely outside the margin of error. And also, she's losing in Wisconsin, but she's still within the margin of error, according to Quinnipiac as well. As the Democrat here at the table, you must be concerned.
Well, I think across the board, there is reason to be concerned that she is underperforming with some of these constituencies, which are pretty core to the Democratic coalition. I do think she's continuing to make progress. And if you look at where she was when she went to the top of the ticket, you've seen kind of steadily these numbers have crept up over the course of the last couple of months as she's making this argument. But this will be a big task for her in the final push here, is getting African-American voters, particularly men. The other kind of big overlay here is the gender gap. She is leading by double digits with women, but losing by double digits with men. So trying to drive down those margins with African-American audiences, Latino audiences, but particularly men. And so I think looking at what the Harris campaign does in terms of their paid spending to try to target some of those audiences, and then listening to how she's reaching out. Again, she doesn't have to win men to win this election, and she probably won't. But she does have to drive down those margins a little bit. And I think that's part of where the campaign will be focused for this final 3 weeks.
Yeah, and some of those margins are significant. 15 points or so she's losing to male voters in Pennsylvania, according to one of those polls. All right, we're going to have a lot more to discuss. And coming up on CNN this morning, battling misinformation in the wake of 2 deadly hurricanes.
Mr. President Trump, former President Trump, get a life, man. Help these people.
President Biden calling out Donald Trump as he continues to push unverified claims. Plus, Boeing is expected to plead guilty for its role in 2 deadly plane crashes. The details in our morning roundup. And how the top of the ticket could impact down ballot races critical to the Senate's balance of power.
Harris is obviously making this harder for you. You're not endorsing her.
Well, that's because I don't want this race to be nationalized any more than they want it to be nationalized. I want to talk about Montana.
Grief isn't talked about much, but that's what my podcast is all about.
I had the best possible version of a goodbye with my mother.
This is All There Is, Season 3, with my guest, actor Andrew Garfield. In 2019, Andrew's mom, Lynn Garfield, died after a struggle with pancreatic cancer.
Without the ending that I had, I'm not sure if I'd be able to eloquently talk about it, to be honest.
Listen to All There Is with Anderson Cooper, wherever you get your podcasts.
There is false information that federal employees who are there to help people will actually take their land. And what we have seen is people reticent, reluctant to access the relief to which they are entitled and which will help them because of the fear that that false information has instilled in them.
And that was Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas pushing back on just one of the rumors which have popped up during Hurricanes Helene and Milton. The storms and their aftermath have quickly been turned into a campaign issue by Donald Trump and his allies.
They're dying and they're getting no help from our federal government because they have no money, because their money's been spent on people that should not be in our country. It's been a terrible response from the White House.
Now, the Biden administration is pushing back, and former President Obama also chiming in on this on the campaign trail.
The idea of intentionally trying to deceive people in their most desperate and vulnerable moments. And my question is, when did that become okay?
Mr. President Trump, former President Trump, get a life, man. Help these people.
All right, my panel is back. Do you think voters are just tuning all this out?
No, I don't. And here's why. According to the Pew Research Center, earlier this year, about 22% of people trust government all the time. I think what you're seeing from many people, particularly former President Trump, is capitalizing on that with the lies and misinformation to further drive a wedge between what people think of government and so on. So, do I think they're tuning out the sort of daily chatter?
All the noise.
No, I don't, Manu. And I think this message of your government does not serve you well and is lying to you and is doing bad things and is taking away from you in a time of disaster. I think absolutely there are people for whom that is buying now. Who are buying that message?
Yeah, and Doug, you're from North Carolina, so this obviously is critical to the presidency. What impact is all this having, and what Trump is saying having on voters there?
Yeah, I'm hearing two sets of things. One is a lot of this disinformation. People asking me, "Did you hear about this? Did you hear about that?" And me having to debunk that through, to them. The other is from elected officials. Senator Kevin Corbin, who represents that part of North Carolina, Chuck Edwards, who represented in Congress, Virginia Fox. They're pushing back very hard, even if they're not going after Donald Trump necessarily by name, though sometimes that's happening. They're pushing back on this as well. But the impact we still don't know electorally, because you have 25 counties that have been declared disaster emergency declarations, and a lot of those still have offices for boards of elections that are closed. Real questions about how are we going to do early voting in those areas that's coming just next week.
What do you make of, just before you jump in, I just want you to get in to weigh in on Biden, you used to work for Biden, coming out and really calling out Donald Trump by name in this. What was behind that decision?
Well, I think a genuine frustration and anger about the fact that Donald Trump is using a moment where people need help and need to be able to get accurate, good information about where they can get resources, and they're not getting it. And Trump is muddying the waters and making it harder for people who are in need to get what they need. So I think there was a humanity behind it. I think he was expressing a genuine frustration. I also think these moments, natural disasters like this create leadership tests for leaders. And Donald Trump, I think, is failing this one pretty miserably. And I think this is the kind of thing that people do remember. I mean, sort of to the point, it's, not only do people absorb the information day to day, but, they're looking at how are our leaders reacting to this moment where I need help. I'm looking to somebody to say, this is the direction that you need to go. And you're not getting it. And I do think people remember that. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of discussion of 2012 and, Obama and Chris Christie embracing in the wake of Superstorm Sandy. These are the kinds of things in the last few weeks in an election that kind of sear into people's minds. What kind of leader is this person? And that's where I think Donald Trump is really is not meeting the moment.
We'll see it. We'll see.
I was going to say, it's funny. We have elections during hurricane season. And I think as 4 baseball fans at this table here, often when they take a picture out of the game, they'll say he can lose it, he can't win it. One may not win an election based on how they perform during a crisis, but they can certainly lose it by mismanaging how their approach.
Yeah, we'll see how voters ultimately react. All right, still ahead on CNN this morning, the tales of destruction and survival in the wake of Hurricane Milton.
Hello. He was frantically wailing his arms. We went over, and it literally was like a scene out of the Castaway movie.
We are live in Florida's Gulf Coast, where rescue and recovery efforts are now underway for the state's second disaster in 2 weeks. Plus, in our morning roundup, more evidence could soon be unsealed in Donald Trump's election interference case. How Trump is fighting against the release.
I've lived in Florida since 1989.
Yeah.
Never have I experienced damage or the amount of tornadoes that came through this area.
Yeah.
And it was the most frightening thing I've ever lived through.
This morning, the death toll from Hurricane Milton, now it's 16. That number could climb as some Florida residents are still unaccounted for. 6 of those deaths reported in St. Lucie County, where several tornadoes touched down. And this morning, many schools in the county remain closed. And that's where we find CNN's Ivan Rodriguez. Ivan, how do things look right now just before sunrise?
Manu, we're still seeing a lot of debris, a lot of destruction here where we are in Fort Pierce. To my left here, you can see a semi that has been toppled on its side. Walking now near the front of that semi, you can see the wheels they're sticking up, laying on top of a tree. Interestingly enough, Manu, on the other side of the road, this main road to my left, there's another semi, same exact thing. Its trailer completely crushed as well. We've been able to drive around in the last 24 hours through this neighborhood. A lot of homes are damaged from what we can tell. The sheriff's office saying that there's more than 100 homes that were damaged in this area. We also know that search and rescue crews are still working around the clock. Here, what the sheriff here had to say.
And our search and rescue efforts are they're active. We're looking to rescue as many people as we can. We're talking about entire modular homes that were lifted off their foundation. And you can't even recognize it's just a 12-foot pile of rubbish. These tornadoes came out of nowhere. Our deputies reported back. I heard for myself. I was out there with them. 6 different tornadoes touched down in a matter of 20 minutes.
Just absolutely incredible devastation, Manu, that nobody here was expecting. Longtime residents saying that they've been absolutely shocked. St. Lucie emergency responders saying that they actually received 900 calls for assistance in the span of just 90 minutes. We know that at least 3 tornadoes struck down in this county in the span of about 25 minutes as well. Also hearing from the National Hurricane Center that yes, we typically do see tornadic activity when it comes to hurricanes prior to landfall, as they're making landfall, but these ones were just so different. They were more powerful and they lasted a lot longer as well.
Just stunning devastation. That pickup truck on top of the tree, just wow. Ivan Rodriguez from Fort Pierce, Florida. Thank you for that report. And for more now, let's go to meteorologist Derek Van Dam. So Derek, you heard the officer there saying 6 different tornadoes touched down in a matter of 20 minutes.
Yeah, we know that landfalling hurricanes are prolific tornado developers and they can spawn them, but they're usually short-lived and they cause generally minor to considerable damage. But when we're talking about the significant damage that we've seen in Fort Pierce, Palm Beach County, like this one coming out of Wellington, Florida, this is on the eastern side of the state, well in advance of the landfall of the storm, which, by the way, was on the other side of the Florida Peninsula, on the Gulf Coast side. So Milton is now moving away. It's becoming extratropical. It's just a low pressure well to the east of the United States, but we're still getting the impacts in terms of rough surf, and some coastal advisories have been lifted, or rather maintained across the border of Florida and Georgia. So this is the Atlantic side, minor coastal flooding, dangerous rip currents, and large waves. And there are still, of course, the 2.5 million plus customers that are without power this morning. It has been a difficult past several days. We are watching the tropics again. Nothing in sight at the moment, but we're going to keep our eye on the western Gulf of, or the western Caribbean. And I have to end with this, Manu, because it's quite a sight. We had a coronal mass ejection. That is a solar flare ejected towards the Earth, and it created beautiful sights of the northern lights as far south as Key Largo, Florida, this overnight period. Amazing.
Yeah, some people in D.C. also saw it too. I missed it, but
right,
apparently
exactly.
It was very, very beautiful. All right, meteorologist Derek Van Dam, thank you for that. And still coming up on CNN this morning, with the Senate up for grabs in November, can Democrats hang on to their thin majority? New polling shows just how tight it could be. Plus, less than a month until Election Day, both campaigns have their eye on Pennsylvania, where voters are split practically down the middle.
It's all about him. It's not about the country.
She doesn't represent my values, my beliefs about policy.
I'm Dr. Sanjay Gupta, host of the Chasing Life podcast.
I'm taking care of my kids and I'm running myself into the ground, and selflessness terrifies me.
That's Dr. Becky Kennedy. Time magazine dubbed her the Millennial Parenting Whisperer. Our conversation got pretty personal. But the reason that I'm sharing this is because I hope this will help some of you out there the way that it helped me. Listen to Chasing Life, streaming now wherever you get your podcasts.
Donald Trump does not care that a mob might attack his own vice president. Do you think he cares about you? Pennsylvania, we do not need 4 more years of that.
It was no coincidence that former President Obama's first rally for Kamala Harris yesterday, took part in Pennsylvania. Both candidates are vying for the Commonwealth's potentially decisive 19 electoral votes. Polling indicates the race remains extremely close, as it was in the past 2 elections. Now, in 2016, Donald Trump won Pennsylvania by just 44,000 votes. Then in 2020, Joe Biden came out on top by some 80,000 votes. Here's a little bit of what we heard from Pennsylvania voters around this time in 2016 and 2020.
I just don't care for Hillary. I think she's a liar. I think she's a fraud. I think she covers up a lot of things.
I have a big problem with his rhetoric. If he shut his mouth and said nothing through the campaign, maybe.
So you're not phased and you're headed in for Trump. I support him 100%.
I regret the decision that I made to vote for Donald Trump in 2016, and I do feel ashamed for it.
All right, joining me now to discuss is Democratic Congressman Chris Deluzio of Pennsylvania. Congressman, thank you so much for waking up this morning and joining me bright and early. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, man.
I want to ask you about what's happening on the ground here in your state and just about the gender gap that we are seeing here. There's a Quinnipiac poll out that has Harris doing better than Trump among women voters, up by 55 to 40, but she's still struggling with male voters. She's down 11 points to Trump in your state among male voters. What is your level of concern about that?
Well, look, I think we have a lot of game left to play between now and Election Day. And we'll see where folks ultimately sort out. But I think a couple of things, of course, are happening. Women in particular are very fired up about protecting their reproductive freedom. And we've got Republicans up and down the ballot, to include Donald Trump, who have attacked that freedom. We've got an economic message to take, I think, to voters who may not know the vice president as well as President Biden and others, about rebuilding manufacturing, about protecting our jobs, about bringing down costs. On all those issues, I think we've got the winning message. We got to get out to voters and make sure they hear it and see the contrast with the trickle-down economics of the Republicans that has never worked for.
But why is she struggling? But why is she struggling with male voters?
Well, look, I can't answer for every voter in the Commonwealth of the country. I think we've seen gender splits for some time now, for several election cycles. And I represent a region that's got an economy that's, healthcare, manufacturing, everything in between. And folks, men and women, are in those industries that are affected by the disastrous trickle-down economics we've seen from the right, that Donald Trump has championed, handing out tax cuts to the very corporations price gouging us. So you've got to be strong on our economic message and reminding folks we are the ones standing up for reproductive freedom and for our democracy against the threats that guys like Donald Trump pose.
So speaking of the economic message, yesterday Donald Trump was in Detroit. He pitched an idea involving car loans and deducting the interest from those car loans. I want you to listen to his pitch.
Today, I am also announcing that as part of our tax cuts, we will make interest on car loans fully deductible.
That sounds like something consumers might support, no?
Well, I think he's big up as he goes along. And I'm a guy who's going to support whatever can bring down costs for folks. Remember, we passed in the House a little piece of the tax cut extension that included not just a child tax credit, but also a business sovereignty that's died with Republicans in the Senate. If he's serious about any sort of bringing down costs, he should talk to his colleagues in the Senate. And look, the other part of this is when he was president, he allowed antitrust enforcement to continue to be effectively absent. One of the main causes of these rising costs is price gouging by big corporations. And we're finally seeing a DOJ, a Justice Department, and an SEC take action there.
But Congressman, would you support what Donald Trump is proposing there?
Look, to see what the details are, but if something is going to bring down costs for folks, that's always going to be something that can earn my support.
Okay, I want to ask you about what's happening in the race for the House. This is, of course, incredibly competitive. The House Republicans have a narrow majority. There are very few battleground districts. You're in what's considered a frontline district in Pennsylvania. What is your level of concern right now, 25 days out, that Republicans may hang on to the House?
I think we're going to take the House. I have colleagues in tough districts all over the country, including several in Pennsylvania. I'd rather be us than the other guys. I mean, they're running away from their anti-abortion records. My opponent is one of these exact guys who's trying to swerve out of trying to ban abortion in Pennsylvania and put doctors in prison. And on economics, these guys have no plan other than more tax cuts for billionaires and huge corporations. Guys like me want to fight against price gouging, want to hold big corporations accountable. As President Obama has once said, right, Republicans could have an asteroid coming for the earth, and their plan would be tax cuts for the ultra-rich. It's never worked. It's never worked for places like Western Pennsylvania.
All right, Congressman Chris DeLuzio from Pennsylvania, thank you. It's going to be a very close race for the House. We will see what happens in 25 days.
Thanks,
All right. In the November election, beyond the White House, the balance of power is up for grabs in the House and also in the United States Senate. Democrats currently have an extremely slim majority in that chamber, 51-49. That includes, of course, 4 independent senators who caucus with Democrats. Republicans are all but certain to pick up at least one seat. That's in West Virginia because of the retiring Senator of West Virginia, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, who said he would not seek re-election. And new polling shows just how difficult it could be for Democrats to hold on to their seats in at least 2 competitive states. That's in Ohio and Montana, both places where Republicans have done well under Donald Trump won twice. Now, in Ohio, a new poll shows Democratic incumbent Senator Sherrod Brown is virtually tied with Republican challenger Bernie Moreno. And in Montana, polling shows an even bigger problem for Democrats. Democratic Senator Jon Tester is trailing Republican Tim Sheehy by 8 points. Now, I was just in Montana, where I asked Senator Tester how the presidential race is impacting his Democratic campaign in that red state.
Harris obviously is making this harder for you. You're not endorsing her.
Well, that's because I don't want this race to be nationalized any more than they want it to be nationalized. I want to talk about Montana. That's what this race is about.
But would you vote for her?
That's between me and the ballot box.
This is such a difficult map for Democrats. I mean, they have to have an absolute perfect night simply to have a 50-50 Senate. And that would, if Kamala Harris wins, she could almost certainly, or very likely, face a Republican Senate.
It is definitely a tough map for Democrats. There's no question about it. And, I think in places like Ohio and Montana, look, you have people like Tester and Sherrod Brown who are well known and well liked by their constituents. I think their best shot is to run as independent a campaign as they possibly can. That doesn't mean attacking Kamala Harris every day, but it means talking with clarity about the ways in which you differ and making sure that your voters understand that their interests are always going to come first for you. I think Brown is doing a really, he's somebody who has always been really effective in the way that he talks, particularly to blue-collar voters, the way he talks about manufacturing, union jobs, and has been successfully reelected in Ohio many times. So I don't think this is a done deal. But look, there's no question it's a tough map for Democrats.
It's so hard to separate yourself from the top of the ticket when you're someone like Jon Tester. He's got to run like 20 points ahead of Kamala Harris.
Yeah, all politics are national now. Sorry, Senator Tester, and every senator. But we often say that politics is like football, that's a game of inches. It's also a game of time of possession. And every race that we're looking at, Republicans feel that they're in a good place because they have the ball and they're on offense. It's hard to identify anywhere that they're on defense. You could sort of argue Texas, but that's not real, most likely. So they're on offense. They have the ball. It's why they feel comfortable. I sat down with the comms director at the NRCC a couple weeks ago, and it wasn't, we're going to run the table. It's, here's where we are, and we feel confident. That's a great place to be 25 days out from the election.
What's remarkable is that what's going to happen here is that there's probably going to be a narrow majority, one side or the other. Republicans favor to take it. The House will be a narrow Republican majority or a narrow Democratic majority. Very unlikely one side's going to have a blowout. And the president's going to have to face potentially a divided Congress in the next 2 years, a recipe for gridlock.
And not just a divided Congress, but a polarized Congress, particularly in the House. A lot of the folks are coming in are not coming in as centrist. They're coming in as sort of the more fire-breathing type of member that we've seen in the last years. You know, even assuming a Republican flip in the Senate, what I continue to be struck by is even how close some of these obvious races are. Texas, which I totally agree, Doug, that it's not. Ted Cruz is going to win that race. You know, I think we can agree on that. But he's still only up by 5 points now. How is that humanly possible? Now, some of that is an unpopular candidate, but all of these races are remarkably close. To Manu's point, it's on a race level, but also on a body-wide level of the House. And so, good luck to the next president in the United States.
Manu, one thing to remember that's really important is these members who win and senators who win, they get sworn in before January 20th. That means certifying the vote, something we've all paid attention to in past elections, very critical in this race.
Yeah, I mean, January 3rd is the day that Congress gets sworn in. That means they're going to elect a speaker. And then who's the new speaker?
They might elect a speaker.
Might elect a speaker. We saw what happened last time.
Yeah,
and
we'll
then
see.
January 6th comes on. That's a whole another recipe. And again, another recipe for can they actually legislate in like this environment? We shall see. That hasn't worked so well in the last couple of years. All right, after the break on CNN This Morning, walking a fine line, Kamala Harris' battle with staying loyal to the president while differentiating herself. Plus, closing the gender gap, former President Obama's appeal to black men who plan to vote for Trump.
If anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
All right, 2.5 months into her candidacy and less than 4 weeks until Election Day, Vice President Kamala Harris has faced renewed pressure to differentiate herself from President Biden, while also remaining loyal to the man with whom she has served for the last 4 years. Despite proposing some policies that are different from Biden's, Harris has mainly pointed to her age as proof that she will not be Biden 2.0.
Clearly, I am not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald Trump. And what I do offer is a new generation of leadership for our country.
All right, joining me now, CNN political commentator Michael Smerconish. He's also the host, of course, of CNN Smerconish. Michael, good morning. It's so great to see you live from Philadelphia this morning. Poll after poll, Michael, as you know, says that voters do want change. They want change. That answer from The View this week really undercuts that message. How much do you think that hurt her in this campaign?
Manu, I appreciate always being with you. When I saw that video clip for the first time, what immediately ran through my mind is Joe Biden would have had a different answer, right? I mean, I'm sure if you said to President Biden, what would you have done differently? He would have said, well, of course, I have lots of regrets. So what would be wrong by extension with his vice president saying, I'm proud of our record. I'm proud of the NATO alliance. I'm proud of the CHIPS Act. I'm proud of restoring jobs. I'm proud of having less chaos in the White House. But in retrospect, geez, I wish we'd been quicker to act on the border. Of course, losing 13 on the way out of Afghanistan is a huge regret. I think acknowledging one's shortcomings would be well received by the American public, but she struggles with this. Now, on the other hand, I have to say, to your point, you look at that Times Siena College survey, and for the first time, she is seen as more of a change agent than he, meaning Trump. So maybe it's winning for her. I don't know. I just thought that it was a poor response and then repeated with Colbert. It's not as if it was gotcha and she didn't see it coming.
Yeah, I was surprised that she didn't have a better answer for this. What do you think that she is struggling right now to really close the deal? Look, she, of course, had that surge in the immediate aftermath of becoming the candidate, but the race, poll after poll, swing state after swing state, she's within the margin of error. Maybe she's a little bit ahead. Maybe Trump was a little bit ahead. What do you think her biggest challenge is right now in the last 25 days?
She's just not been able to close the deal. And meanwhile, he gets darker and darker. There's just like no effort at all on his part for persuasion. It's all about motivation. And I can only think that the mindset on Trump's side of the aisle is we're tapped out at 45 or 46% of the vote. All we want to do is make sure that ours show up. There's some reticence, there's some reluctance on the part of certain voters who don't like Trump but are not willing to go with Vice President Kamala Harris. And I think, and you've been covering this morning, I think this is a large part of the President Obama pitch, especially to men of color, because that's the group that seems to be hesitant for whatever reason.
And look, Trump is winning with those male voters, but he is underwater significantly with women voters, struggling with suburban women voters. Can he win the presidency, say, losing Pennsylvania women by 15 points, according to the Quinnipiac poll? Is that enough for him still to make up the margin, the difference with men, and become president again?
Manu, you could fact check me on this. I don't think since he entered the stage in 2015, I don't think he's ever been above water with a majority of Americans. I mean, he's been able very carefully to assemble these elements that get him just enough. Of course, in 2016, there was an active, robust third-party factor that there isn't in this cycle. That might be the difference. Can he win Pennsylvania being so far underwater with women in the Commonwealth? I don't think so. But it's a game of inches. You see all the data. You've got the Quinnipiac, the Q study, same as I do. It's a toss-up in PA right now. I have no idea what happens.
Yeah, toss-up across the board in the 7 key swing states. Michael Smerconish, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thanks,
really appreciate it. Absolutely. And
you too.
For our viewers, remember to tune in to Smerconish tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, right here on CNN. All right, 51 minutes past the hour, so here's your morning roundup. Today, Boeing expected to plead guilty to a federal fraud charge over its role in 2 fatal 737 MAX plane crashes in 2018 and 2019. The company will pay up to $487 million in fines, a fraction of the nearly $25 billion sought by the crash victims' families. And nearly 1,000 people have been rescued from floodwaters following Hurricane Milton in Florida. 200 of those rescues happening in Hillsborough County alone, where a 14-year-old boy was found stranded alone in deep water.
He was waving us down, flagging us down. Most people were saying hello. He was frantically wailing his arms. We went over, and it literally was like a scene out of the Castaway movie, how he's hanging on for dear life.
A trip to a gold mine turns deadly for some tourists in Colorado. 1 person died and 23 people were rescued after an elevator malfunctioned, trapping them in the mine. They were trapped 1,000 feet underground for up to 6 hours. Now, Donald Trump's legal team has 1 week to appeal the release of sealed evidence in his January 6th criminal case. Judge Tanya Chutkan has approved redactions to the exhibits that prosecutors filed in support of a recent 165-page brief in the case. But Trump is opposing the release, claiming it interferes with the election. Now, turning to this, former president, well, I want to ask, before we turn to that, I want to ask you about this, Elliot. Trump wants to delay the release. Will he be successful?
No. And here's, look, big picture. Pretend this is not about Donald Trump at all. There is a presumption that anything that is filed in a court is going to be made public. Anytime something is sealed, like documents like this are, eventually the court seeks to get them out. Now here, even if Trump were to win, a lot of stuff would be, number one, would be redacted, names, important information, identifying information, number one. And number two, even if it did come out, much of the evidence is already out there in the record, and people's views about Donald Trump are pretty fully baked in. So not a big deal in the grand scheme of this long-running litigation. He's got a right to appeal it, but even if it gets out there, not so much.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm sure the Democrats will make hay of it. Will it make a difference to voters? But you're right, baked in. That's the question. It's how much of this is baked in? Maybe a lot of it. We'll see what's new. All right, now turning to this, former President Obama hitting the trail for Kamala Harris. Obama kicking off the final sprint to Election Day in Pennsylvania, where he spoke directly to a specific group of voters.
I'm sorry, gentlemen. I've noticed this especially with some men who seem to think Trump's behavior, the bullying and the putting people down, is a sign of strength. And I am here to tell you that is not what real strength is.
Men, a group that Harris has struggled with, at a recent poll of registered voters showed Donald Trump leading Harris 51 to 43% among men. But on the flip side, Harris appears to be winning among women registered voters. That same poll shows her up 52% to Trump's 43%, and Trump recently has tried to directly appeal to those women voters.
Women are poorer than they were 4 years ago, are less healthy than they were 4 years ago, are less safe on the streets than they were 4 years ago, are more stressed and depressed and unhappy than they were 4 years ago. I will fix all of that, women. I will fix all of that. Women will be happy, healthy, confident, and free.
All right, Kate. Trump is Trump is back. Obama's out. Trump is making his pitch. How do you see this playing out?
Well, look, that's Trump's effort to reach out to women. I mean, first of all, he's got some huge problems here. One, he put 3 justices on the Supreme Court who overturned Roe. That has been a massive hurdle for him, I would argue, as it should be, but has been a massive hurdle for him with women, particularly suburban women. His behavior over the course of this campaign has really done nothing to assuage concerns that women have about the fact that he's, brutish, that he's a bully. I mean, we've really seen that, he's tripled down on that kind of behavior. That doesn't really go a long way toward assuaging, again, particularly suburban women who, might have some policy agreements with him, but see his conduct as unacceptable. Obama out for Kamala Harris. First of all, there's really no greater orator in the Democratic Party than Barack Obama. When you see him out in force on the campaign trail, you remember just how effective and powerful he can be. And I think he sort of called out some of the hesitation in a really that some men have in a really direct way that I think is productive, and he can do that in a way that that others can't. He can do that in a way that's hard for Kamala Harris to do, and so that's helpful.
But is that enough to close the gap? Obama on the trail trying to appeal to male voters?
I think every little bit helps.
Yeah,
every little bit helps.
Well, and it's also he's not just the greatest orator in the Democratic Party. He's an individual who a generation of black families literally had a picture of in their homes. Now, if it's a question of closing the gap and winning, or simply chipping away at that segment of the black male population that finds Donald Trump appealing, and it's there, and it's non-zero, and it's frightening to the Harris campaign. Certainly, it has an impact.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of these guys were toddlers when Obama was president.
Yeah.
So
there was also footage of Obama speaking to a smaller group, and the messaging that he was doing was lecturing them. And that doesn't seem to me to be really motivational to get your voters out or to change their minds. That might turn some of those voters off. People don't like being lectured. Mm-hmm. And look,
and which is the criticism.
We're seeing all the Democratic all-stars. We're seeing that's how I viewed it.
Sure. I think he was calling it out directly.
I get that, but look, we see all the Democratic all-stars coming out for Harris right now, and it sort of reminds me of 2016, except in 2016, that was sort of the coronation of this is Hillary's time, we're going to do it. This is if we're in a vibes election. This is coming to rescue the ship.
Let me ask you a quick question. Name a better surrogate, either party, for who their target audience is, whether it's a question of turning off sort of the other side. Either party, whether it's Mitt Romney or
but in communications, the messenger and the message matter, and some of this messaging from a great messenger, I think, is a bit off.
Yeah. See, I don't think it's lecturing though. I think it's calling Trump out directly in a way that is saying we're not going to dance around this. We're not going to pretend. We're not going to be afraid. No, but I think there is taking it to voters directly in a way that works for him. I mean, you say messenger and message. He is such an effective messenger that he can do it. And I think not having Democrats not sort of stand back and say like, well, we have to kind of like fear the Trump, the great power of the almighty Trump, and just say no, like what he's doing is not it's not strength. And calling it out directly, I do think is effective. And I don't see that as lecturing so much as piercing that veil directly. And I think that's important to do.
Quickly,
going after Trump, one thing, and piercing his veil, yes. But going to the voters and saying, you're doing this wrong, that's what I think can come off as lecturing. And that's the off messaging.
Yeah. All right. We'll see how voter again. Just 25 days. Can you believe it? A blink of an eye. It will be here. It's already here. All right. And don't forget to join me on Inside Politics Sunday, this Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern and 11 a.m. Eastern. We'll take a deep dive into the politics of abortion and reproductive rights. And of course, we'll look at the state of the race with just over 3 weeks until Election Day. Thank you to our panel for joining me this morning. And thank you for joining us. I'm Manu Raju. CNN News Central starts right now.
TCM's new limited series is called Making Change. I'm your host, Ben Mankiewicz. I'll be discussing some of the most significant political films of all time with a number of special guests. Steven Spielberg, Caitlin Collins, Stacey Abrams, Robert Gates, Sally Field, just to name a few.
There's politics in everything. There's politics in every genre.
Without the arts, you can't have a sophisticated culture.
Join us for Making Change, Fridays beginning at 8 p.m. on Turner Classic Movies.